Today's daf we're going to be learning is Bava, Kamma, Daf Samchvav. Shavua Tov to everyone. Today's daf is sponsored by the Hadran Zoom family in loving memory of Sergeant Ephraim ben Harav Shmuel of Liat, Hashem Yikom Damo, Ephraim Yachman, son of Liat and Sammy, and grandson of our friend and fellow learner Harriet Hartman. Even as he fought valiantly to defend Am Yisrael and Eretz Yisrael, his sincerity, commitment to Avat Yisrael and Torah Yisrael, and devotion to family and friends shone through as they did throughout his life. May Hashem comfort and give strength to his entire family. Yehi Zichro Baruch. Okay, we are going to get started with a review for a quick minute about how we ended yesterday's daf. We were learning about Rabbi Ilah, who basically said that if you steal a baby lamb and then it turns into an ayil, which is already called something different, or it's a calf and it becomes a bull, that is a shinoi. This is going to be the main topic of today, which is how does shinoi work? Or what else can cause the ganav to acquire the item, what it means, and what's the relevance of this. Okay, this is a very strange concept for us to understand, that in Jewish law, there are certain things that if you steal them and certain things happen, and that's going to be really what we're going to discuss today, the item becomes owned by the thief, which is a little strange. Okay, generally, the thief has to return the stolen item. But there are certain cases where, for example, in this case, what we're saying is if the animal grows up to be already called a different kind of animal, that means that the owner acquires basically the animal when it's stolen. And then what does it mean acquires it? Well, the owner, the thief obviously has to reimburse the person for whatever they stole. But the question is are they reimbursing it once it becomes, let's say I'm the thief. Okay, we'll use the example that I'm the thief. I steal an item from you and the item changes in price. We discussed this. The item goes up in value, goes down in value. The item, right, I use it to build a house with. And now, can I do, at a certain point, do I acquire the item to the extent that I do not have to anymore return you the item? I have to pay you the value of the item. And then when I pay you the value of the item, it'll be based on the value of what it was at the time. Like, let's say I break it. Right? So now it's worth nothing anymore because it's broken. But obviously, okay, and this is why acquiring it makes sense. I acquired it to the extent that I'm responsible then to pay you back what it was originally and not what it's worth right now. So part of the issue here is, how do we assess the value of which I am obligated to pay you back? If I acquire it, then everything is basically assessed from the early stage. So that's what it says here. If I stole a taleh, it became an ayil, and egel nasa shor. So now, since it becomes mine, Rabbi Ilah says, well, then there's no 4 or 5 times payment, because 4 or 5 times payment comes when I slaughter and sell your animal. If I acquired it because the animal grew up, which means that at the moment it changed, it becomes mine, and then I slaughtered it, well, I slaughtered my own animal. Now, Rabbi Chanina disagreed with this and said, no way, no how. Okay? He didn't think that that's the case, and he quotes a brayta that says, what are you talking about? Ganav talev nasa ayil, egav nasa shor. You pay kefel, and you pay tashlumei arba'a v'chamisha. And he said you pay it, now this is the part we haven't dealt with yet, based on the price, the kefel, and the 4 or 5 times payment are based on this early price of the price of the animal, the way it was at the early stage, okay, when I stole it. So they disagree about whether there's a 4 or 5 time payment. And then we had this whole kind of funny, they're very passionate about it. And Rabbi Ilah says, your source is nothing, and God save you from your opinion. And Rabbi Chanina says back to him, God save you from your opinion. They have this big fight. Okay, today we're going to see what they actually agree about. But we'll get to in another 3 minutes. But what we need to finish off is we said, okay, it's true that Rabbi Ilah got very angry at Rabbi Chanina and didn't agree with his approach. But in the end, Rabbi Chanina brought a brayta. So what does Rabbi Ilah do with that brayta? To which we answered, Rabbi Ilah basically says that brayta is Beit Shammai's opinion. And Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel have a different machloket in a different case, but it's the same principle. So we have a case here where somebody gives a gift to a prostitute. It's not a theft case, that's why it's different. Gives as a gift to a prostitute, which cannot be used as a korban, gives her wheat, and then the prostitute takes it and turns it into flour. Can that flour be used as a sacrifice? Again, this is change, okay? So one was the change happened naturally. This is the change happened, by action. Right now, it doesn't seem to be that that's different. But basically, there, Beit Shammai says you can't use it because so what that you changed it? It doesn't mean anything. Okay, it still was given as gift to a prostitute. Likewise, our talet, it was still right. No change happened to it. In which case, it didn't change owners. Okay, which means that's why you have to pay the 4 or 5 times payment. And Beit Hillel says no, it's permitted to use it. It's something different. Right? Which is the same thing here. It became a ram. It's not an aisle anymore. It's a ram, which means, right? It's not a calf. It's a bull. It's something different, which means, and that's Beit Hillel, and that's what Rabbi Eli says, and that's why there's no 4 or 5 times payment. Because as soon as it becomes something different, the thief owns it. Once they own it, there's no liability of the 4 or 5 times payment. Okay, so now we had this discussion. Where does Beit Shammai get his opinion from? Where's Beit Hillel? We're in the middle of this ping pong about where do they learn it from the psukim? So I made a small chart on the page. There's a study guide today, pretty short, but with 3 small charts that just help out with a few of the basics of today's stuff. So we said Beit Shammai says gam, which includes shinuyehem. The pasuk says about the etnan zona, about the gift for a prostitute, and the machir kelev, money used to buy a dog. Both of those cannot be the money that you sold your dog. Neither of those can be used on the altar, because they're both despicable, gam shnehem. Okay, also both of them. Also doesn't need to be shnehem. The hem isn't really necessary. So they're going to darshan those words. So according to Beit Shammai, gam lerabot shinuyehem, gam is an inclusive term. Also comes to include something else, even if you change them. Beit Hillel, hem below shinuyehem. No, it says shnehem, these, not any others. Beit Shammai, Hahu, him, v'lo v'ladotehem. This is what do you mean? You can't darshan him and not their shinuyim. You need it for a different drasha. Him and not their v'ladot. If you give an animal to a zona for a gift, to a prostitute for a gift, and then that animal gives birth to another animal, well, that one can go on the altar. And that's what the hem is for, the shnei hem. These and not their offspring. That's hudata. That's what it comes for. Ubeit Hillel, he says, oh no, hey means them and not their offspring, and them and not any changes you've made to them. Okay, in other words, again, just them, not their offspring, just them, not if you changed it. Beit Hillel, haktiv gam. Well, what does he do with gam then? Gam, again, is supposed to include something additional, and that was the whole premise of Beit Shammai's opinion. Well, gam lebeit Hillel kasha. Gam, according to Beit Hillel, is left as a difficulty. We don't really know what he does with the word gam. We don't have a good answer. Okay, so that was ending that sugya, but we're not really ending that sugya because ad kan lo pligi, and Rashi helps us out here. He says we're talking about Rabbi Eli and Rabbi Chanina. We're no longer talking about Beit Shammai, Beit Hillel. We're now back to the basic machloka between Rabbi Eli and Rabbi Chanina about is there 4 or 5 time payment for an animal that you stole when it was a baby, and by the time you slaughtered it, it was already fully grown, called something else. Does that, right? So basically, it sounds like, is the shinoi, the change that happens to the animal, does that cause the animal to be acquired by the thief, in which case he wouldn't pay the 4 or 5? That's Rabbi Eli. According to Rabbi Chanina, no, it doesn't acquire it for him. Okay, so now. The main difference between them is, does this change cause it to be acquired by the thief or not? That's their machlok. But when it comes to le'inyan shalume, but when it comes to payment, and Rashi says here, just so you can get exactly what they mean here at this point, kigon kefel Rabbi Eli and arba avachamisha to Rabbi Chanina. Okay, in other words, remember, according to Rabbi Eli, there is no arba avachamisha, but he only argues on that point. Now, now we're going to focus on the part we didn't focus on, which is it said kefel and tashlumei arba avachamisha. You pay ke'ein sheganav. You pay based on the original price at the time of the theft. Now, well, it's true Rabbi Eli doesn't think there's 4 or 5 payment, but he does think there's kefel. And the assumption is, since he didn't argue with Rabbi Chanina about it, he probably agrees with this Breita that it is ke'en sheganav, even though he rejected the Breita. But the point is, he rejected one element of the Breita. But the fact that you pay based on the moment you stole it, that they all agree about. And Rashi even points out, inami, additionally, I'm at the second line on Rashi here, biyokra v'zola below shinoi. Also, if it went up and down in price, you're going to pay the kefal based on the original price. Any kind of change, you're basically going to pay kefal based on, we're going to assess it on the value of when it was stolen. Well, right, and how do we know this? Dikatani, because it says in that Tanaitic source, well, you might remember, what did we learn yesterday? Lema tahavi tiyuv tederav. But this stands in juxtaposition to what Rav said. And now Rav can't really go against this explicit braita, and assuming if Rabbi and Rabbi Chanina have an argument about this, but nobody argues about that. Da'amar Rav, keren ke'en sheganav mishalem. Okay, you pay the principal based on the moment you stole it. But tishlumei kefel, but tishlumei arba'a v'chamisha, kisha'ad hamada b'din. But if you remember, Rav's whole approach is that when it comes to the kefel and the arba'a v'chamisha, because it's something the court is instituting, we're going to do it based on the value at the day we go to court and not at the time that you stole it. So how do we deal with Rav and this braita that totally contradicts, and the fact that Rabbi Chanina, Rabbi Eli all seem to agree with this braita about that point? About, again, not about is there a 4 or 5 payment? That was the first big question. But now the issue is, at what price do we assess the kefel? If the animal grew up, if the animal, changed in, remember, we also had getting fatter, getting thinner. If the animal goes up or down in value, the prices change. At what price do we evaluate the kefel? So we seem to have 2 different approaches here. So Amarava, tla'im kedmi kara damim kishalachsha. This is a very difficult answer. I'm going to give you 3 different explanations about how to read this, okay, because each one kind of has its weaknesses. But what we're basically going to say is, wait, that source was talking about tla'im, about the sheep, right? The lambs. And this one, Rav, is talking about money. Okay, whoa, what are we talking about? So let's start with Rashi. Rashi says it all depends on what commodity you're paying in. Okay, so you now go to replace the taleh that you stole. You can pay in 2 ways. This taleh now became an ayil. It's much older. It's worth more. When you go to pay the kefel, it's going to depend on whether you pay back in animals or you pay back in money. This is a bit of a strange answer, which is why Tosfot, both the Ri and Rabbi and 2 Balei Tosfot, the 2 main Balei Tosfot, each have different approaches and say, we don't know where you got this from. But that's why I wanted to kind of, because it's a little out there. But he says, if you're going to pay in animals, and let's say it was a taleh and you want to pay tla'im, you're either going to pay with a baby lamb or you're going to pay with this ram, which is the fully grown one. So basically, we're going to say, if you're paying in animals, pay in the time that you stole it, because you're paying in the same object that you stole. But if you're paying in money, the kefel, right? So you're paying the extra animal in the lower number of the moment that you stole. If you're paying in money and the value of what you stole, well, then we're going to do the kefel assessed on what it's worth now, because that we go back to Rav, which is the court is assessing you owe kefel. So if we're giving a monetary number to it, it's what they're basically, I think the best way to understand Rashi is that since if you're paying in animals, it doesn't make sense that you're paying a kefel payment for a baby and you're paying the bigger animal. But if you're paying in money, we can say, okay, we're assessing it, what this animal is worth right now. So we're going to assess it based on its value now. Okay, that's one way to go. The Ri gives a different example. He says, no, it's a difference between not what commodity you're paying in. It's about what type of change happened. Notice the change of taleh to ayil is not, that's a change in the body of the animal. Okay. When Rav was talking about his thing, he was talking about a fluctuation in price. Nothing changed in the item, right? We all know you go to a store and you can buy the same, right? I remember always this stuck in my mind, the exact same bag of chocolate chips, the exact same company. One store you could buy for 10 shekel, 10.5 shekel, another store it costs 15.5 shekel, the exact same item, right? And sometimes, it could be fruits and vegetables that the exact same tomatoes, one week they're worth this and the next week they go up in value. So, right, the price fluctuation between the stores is really a good example, but the one about the price changing from one week to the next, all of a sudden there's a drought, it's hard to find tomatoes, there's a cold spell, it affects the crops, and all of a sudden they go up in price. So that's a different kind of change. That's damim, that's value, versus the change in the animal. When it's a change in the animal, then we go by the original, by when you sold it. If it's just a price fluctuation, then no, we're going to go by the price that it is now, because the price fluctuated and you have to pay this penalty. We're going to charge you now, possibly the higher price. Okay, again, or even maybe the lower price. If you remember, we had a whole thing with Rav that we limited it, but that's the Ri right now. Rabbeinu Tam, which is at the end of that Tosfot, I'm in the Tosfot Dibor Matchil Tla'im Kedmi Kara, says It's a matter of did the value go up or did the value go down? And the tla'im is the value went up because, think about it, a taleh that moves to an aisle obviously is going up in value. And damim, now it's a little weakness because damim could go up or down, but what he's saying, damim here means the price went down. If the price went down, okay, and then either which way, in this case, you're actually, the thief has the upper hand. Because if the animal went up in value, you only have to pay kedemi ikara, the original. You have to replace. The kefel payment is going to be based on the original. And if the price goes down in value, you're only going to have to pay the kefel based on the original, based on the now price, which is lower. So, and then it doesn't mean necessarily any kind of, like there it would be, let's say the animal got thinner, then you would pay less money. You would pay kefel based on what it is now. So again, it's a bit of a debate how to understand what this is, but in the end, either which commentary you choose, what they're basically trying to say is there's no contradiction here because each of the cases, each of the things that were being discussed were different cases. Okay, now we're going to move to the next part of today's stuff, which is connected, but somewhat different. We're going to talk about change, and then we're going to talk about the topic of yei'ush. So the first topic is fairly straightforward. Amar Rabba, shinoi kone, ktiva v'tanina. The fact that there's a change to the animal, and that means that if I steal something or change to anything I steal, steal something and then I change it, okay? Like we'll see in a minute, I take wood and I turn it into a kli. I make a bowl out of the wood, okay? Or I make a shelf in my house. So as soon as I change something, it then becomes acquired by me, which means, again, I don't have to return the item itself. Normally, I have to return the item itself. I don't have to return the item itself. I just have to return its value. Okay? Now, and then its value, usually at the time I acquired it. So I'm a Rabba. Shinoi konek tiva v'tanina. The fact that this is the case is both written in the Torah and written in the Mishna. Ktiva, where is it written in the Torah? Says you have to return the item that you stole. Now, there's really unnecessary words in this pasuk. It could just say hishiva tagzela. It says, I should have, if I translate a little better, you have to return the stolen item that you stole. Okay, that's what it means. So it doesn't make sense. If I have to return the stolen item, why would you say that I stole? Obviously, I stole it if it's a stolen item. So matam lomar asher gazal. Why does it say that the person stole? Im ke'en shegazal yachzir. It's to tell you if it is asher gazal, if it is exactly as you stole it, then yachzir, then you have to return the actual item. V'im lav, if not, damim ba'alma ba'yavishlumin. But if not, you just have to return its value. Chanina, so that's where we get it from the Torah, from the words asher gazal, which are totally unnecessary, and they come to basically say, only if it is exactly the way it was when you stole it and you didn't change it at all, then you actually return the item. But if not, you've acquired the item and you assume a responsibility to replace the item at the value it was when you took it. What about Chanina? Where do we see it in a Mishnah? Hagozel itzim va'asa'an kelim. If you stole wood and you turned it into a vessel. Semer va'asa'an begadim. You stole wool and you turned it into a sweater. Mishalem kishat hagzela. Then you pay the value of the item at the moment you stole it. Inami, alternatively, you can have another source. Now, this actually isn't about theft. This is about a different topic, which is reshit hagez. This is, you have to give your first shearings of your sheep to the Kohen. Now, it says here, lo ispik litnolo ad shetzva'o, excuse me, but if you colored the wool before you gave it to the Kohen, you took all your wool and you colored it, and then you realized, oh, I didn't give the Kohen yet, patur, you're actually exempt from giving the reshit hagez to the Kohen. Why? Because, here it's a little bit different. It was never owned by the Kohen to begin with. And now, right, it just was an obligation on you to give it to the Kohen, but now you changed it. It's now something else. It's not what was obligated to give it to the Kohen, so you actually don't have to give it to the Kohen. It's crazy halacha. We'll learn this when we get to Chulin, when they talk about the halacha of reshit hagez. So now, Alma Shino Kone, what do you see from those sources? That by changing something, you've acquired it, either when you're a thief or if it's your own and it's just you're supposed to give it, you're no longer obligated and now becomes fully yours by doing some change to it. Okay, that's the first statement of Rabba, and on that there really isn't much of a debate. But we're now going to have a big debate. He's going to continue, and then Rav Yosef is going to disagree, and this is going to be the topic for the rest of today. Yei'ush. Okay, what if there's yei'ush? Now, what happens generally? Okay, this happened to me. We got robbed, and they stole a computer. Okay, now, more than one computer. Anyway, basically, I knew that morning there was no way I was getting that computer back, right? The chances are slim to none that I will ever see that computer again. And then in my mind, I said, okay, well, I'm going to go buy a new computer because I was mityaeshet on the old one, right? I said, there's no way I'm getting it back. Done. Okay, I'm not getting this back. Now, that's called yei'ush. Let's go to where yei'ush plays in the most. In the sugya, we'll get to it in Bava Metzia, second chapter of Bava Metzia, about someone who loses an item and I pick it up off the floor. Okay, now, if it's money, then basically I can pick it up and I can keep it. Why? Because the assumption is that you had yei'ush. Okay, you basically decided, okay, you could say you despaired of ever getting it back. If you lose cash on the street, you know that a second later someone's going to pass by and pick it up. There's no siman, there's nothing that connects that money to you, and anyone off the street is probably going to take it, so therefore you assume I'll never get it back again. So if I pick it up, I become the owner of it. Let's say you dropped it, I pick it up, I become the owner because it's ownerless, basically. Okay, nobody owns it anymore. So it's like I picked up something that was hefker. We've talked many times about making something hefker, ownerless. So if, let's say, it's a ring that's particularly unique and you assume that you'll find it because, you'll put up signs, I lost a ring in this place, anybody see it? Well, that's a different story. Then you didn't have yei'ush and then I can't acquire it. So in that case, I have to take it and I have to return it to you. I have to try to find the owner. So yei'ush is kona in an aveda case. Now the question is yei'ush kona in a gneva case? If I steal your item, now there's a big difference, okay? And here's an important difference. When I pick up this money off the floor, the cash, I know that the assumption is that even if you dropped it a second ago, probably, that's actually a question. There's a whole question. What if it's yei'ush shalom midal? What if we don't know? But there's certain assumptions we make that as soon as you drop it, you probably just figure, people look in their wallets all the time. They know how much money they have. And then they realize right away that they lost it. And there's no way you think you're going to get it back again. And therefore, when I pick it up after yei'ush, it becomes mine. In this case, I steal your item. You weren't mityaesh yet. You didn't despair of getting it back. You didn't even know I took it. When I steal it, the yei'ush happens later. Okay? Just like when I stole it and I turned it into a vessel, happens later. So the question is, just like shinui later can be makneh, the object to me, can yei'ush allow me to own the object? Because basically when you have yei'ush, what do? You made it ownerless. Now there's a big debate here among some of the achronim say that it's not exactly the same. It's not like you made it ownerless, because if, let's say, we caught the thief later, you would actually get it back. Okay, I would have to return the lost item. Okay, but the question is it that, or, well, that's not actually true according to Rabba, but let's put that aside for a minute. But the Achronim say that it's either that really they made it ownerless, and basically as soon as you say, I'll never get my computer back, basically it becomes mine because I stole it. So at that moment, let's say, an hour later, it becomes mine because you decided, oh, I'll never find that computer again. Or is it just that there's an opportunity here for it's not ownerless, but there's an opportunity for someone to claim rights to it, basically. So it's like an in-between. But anyway, we don't have to get into all that exactly, but that's already much more in-depth. But the question here, we're going to have a machloket Rabbi and Rav Yosef, is yei'ush kona at all? The fact that you say I'm never going to get my computer back, does that mean that when I stole it, it becomes mine? Okay, so Rabba is going to say yes. And Rav Yosef is going to say no. We actually hold like Rav Yosef. We don't hold that yei'ush acquires it by the thief. Okay, it's not acquired by them. Again, remember, what does it mean acquired? Acquired means that I don't have to return the actual item, but I just have to return its value. So according to Rabba, in the case where my computer was stolen, if we actually found the thief, which we didn't, but if we actually found the thief, I would be able to demand my computer back according to Rav Yosef. According to Rabba, I would not be able to demand my computer back. I would only be able to demand the value because the ganav already acquired it because I gave up hopes of having it and it became theirs. Okay, so that's really the big debate here. And then, the question is, right, at what value do you have to return it? So if we assume yei'ush is kona, At the moment it was stolen, that's the value of it, that you would have to pay, because the thief assumes rights at that point, acquired it, which means at that moment they have to pay back that value. So comes, let's just read Rabba. Rabba says, yei'ush amri Rabbanan denikne. Okay, this is just a continuation of Rabba from before. It doesn't say Rabba said it, but it's a continuation of his words. So he started off, just to remember, he says, Shinoi was written in the Torah, and it says in the Mishna. Yei'ush amri Rabbanan denikne, the rabbis say it is kone, mihu lo yadinan idoraiti d'Rabbanan. But the fact is, I don't know if it's by Torah law or by rabbinical. Okay, whereas that one, I know it says so in the Torah, the first one about Shinoi Kone, yei'ush, I don't know. Now, how would it be d'oraita? Well, d'oraita midi dehavi amotzei aveda, as I told you. Then it would be like someone who finds a lost item. Motzei aveda lav kevan to be yei'ush mara minei mekame detite liyade kanele. Well, when I find something on the street, is it not because you gave up on your hopes of ever getting it back, that when I picked it up, since it was yei'ush before, I basically acquired it? So maybe we say, Hainami kevandim yei'ush mara kanele. Okay, and therefore, can we say, likewise here, when I steal it, now it's different because, again, the yei'ush happens after I steal it. But while it's in my possession and you decide I'll never get it back, and you despair of ever receiving it, of ever seeing it again, then kanele. Okay, alma kane. And then you could say, based on the model of hashavat aveda, we can learn that basically by Torah law, that same Torah law would apply here. O Dilma, or perhaps, and this was his deliberation, he still thinks yei'ush is kone, but maybe it's only rabbinic. Because lo damya la aveda, you could say it's not at all like aveda. Why? Aveda hu dechi ataliyade behetera ataliyade. Well, when I found that money on the street, it was permitted for me to pick it up because you had already disowned the item. You had already said, oh, there's no way I'll ever find it. And therefore, not disowned, but you despaired of it, which basically means you're no longer owning it. And therefore, I was able to pick it up. It was permitted to me. Aval hai, but in the case where I stole something, kevan to be isura ataliyade, it was forbidden for me to take it into my hands. Perhaps it's only midirabanan. Now, why would it be midirabanan? As you would say, then, of course, I shouldn't be able to acquire it. And that's exactly what's so hafuch about this whole thing. It's so confusing. How could it be that I steal something and then I become the owner of it? It seems a little bit strange. So again, remember, owning it doesn't mean I don't have to return it. It might mean I don't have to return the actual item. I just have to return its value to you. And obviously the kefel, the double payment. Anyway, now, why would it be rabbinic then that yei'ush would be kone? If we can't learn it from hashavat aveda, then where do we get it from? Well, he says, it would be learned based on the same principle that we have called takanat shavim. What is takanat shavim? It means that if I steal a beam and I build my roof from it, we don't make me take apart my house to return the item, even though the Torah says I have to return the item I stole. The problem is that most thieves are very hard to catch. And the best way to catch thieves is that they feel guilty about it and they decide to return it. Right? If you ever read the story about the Olar, I forget what it's called in English, of Shalom Aleichem, where he steals this what's called a pocket knife, and it's like the guilt is killing him, and every time you see the item, you just feel more guilty. So we want to encourage thieves to basically give back what they stole. In order to do that, we basically tell them, listen, you don't have to return the beam. You actually just have to return its value. And yes, we saw this. Thank you for Ruth for pointing. Yeah, we saw this in Sukkah with that story of the woman who they stole a beam and they built a Sukkah with it. Remember? And she was screaming at them. So yeah. Okay. So anyway, what do we have here? We have this idea. Now, it's not the same thing, but in order to make it easier for thieves to return things, maybe we'll also say that yei'ush is kone. And that way, again, it just makes it easier. It's another case where you don't actually have to return. Obviously, they wanted the item. They coveted, if you go by the Torah, lo tachmod, right? They coveted the item they wanted. They stole it. So they obviously want it. So let's make it easier for them to return it. At least they'll pay you the monetary value in the case where there was yei'ush. So he's not sure which one we learn it from, but either which way he thinks the yei'ush is kone. And Rav Yosef amar, yei'ush eno kone afilu mid'Rabbanan. And basically, Rav Yosef, and this is how we hold la halacha, just because I gave up on ever wanting to get my computer back, that doesn't mean that the thief acquired the computer. And if we find the thief down the road or the thief comes and admits it, they have to return my computer. Again, unless they did a shinoi to it. What would that be? Maybe erased all my information and put their own information on it. Maybe that would be a shinoi. And then it would no longer, right? It would be impossible for them to return my computer actually in the way it was. So anyway, that's a good question. But in any case, yei'ush, he says, even on a Rabbanit level, there's no such thing that yei'ush is kona. Shinoi, yes, but yei'ush, no. Okay, a change, yes, not yei'ush. So now the structure is going to be very simple. We're going to have 2 questions against Rabba and 1 question against Rav Yosef from Tanaitic sources. Eitiver Rav Yosef le Rabbi. Gazal chametz. This is a Mishna later on in the Masachet. If you stole chametz, va'avar alav Pesach. So let's say on the 1st of Nisan, you steal chametz. And then, okay, let's say I was the thief. So let's say I steal your chametz. I steal a bag of croutons before Pesach. Okay, bread wouldn't be good because who would want the bread back months later? But I steal it on the 1st of Nisan. Then comes Pesach. Now, there's an assumption here. There was no selling of chametz going on. And I left your croutons over Pesach. Now, that's chametz, shavar lava Pesach. Chametz that is left throughout the holiday of Pesach becomes forbidden to benefit from. So now we come to court on the 25th of Nisan, okay, after the holiday of Pesach is over. Omer lo, I say, okay, I stole your bag of croutons. Here are your croutons back. We're now on Amud Bet. Now, the croutons, Rashi points out, this is what we call hezek she'eno nikar, meaning it's not noticeable damage, but it's definitely damage, okay? I now took your croutons, I left them over Pesach, I didn't sell them, and I didn't return them to you before so you could eat them in time, and I ruined them because they're now worth nothing. But because it's hezek she'eno nikar, like if I stole your bowl and I smashed it to pieces, of course, I would have to return its value. I couldn't say, oh, here, take your broken bowl. That's a different story because that's noticeable damage. This is not noticeable damages. It looks like the same croutons. I could just give them back to you. Now, what does this have to do with yei'ush? Well, Rabba, you want to say yei'ush is kona. Now, remember, what does it mean it's kona? If this were kona to me when you were mityaesh, and in a minute we'll prove why it's obvious, you despaired of ever getting this back. If we can prove that, and you say yei'ush is kona, what should happen? When you're mityaesh, I acquire it. When I acquire it, I now have to return the value and not the stolen item. This is where, by the way, it ends up an advantage to the one who I stole from because I'd have to, and now you're getting back something that's worth nothing. And if I acquired it, I would actually have to pay back its value from the beginning. So now, why do we know that you were clearly despaired of ever getting your croutons back? Because Kevan Demati Idan Isura, on Pesach morning, basically, Erev Pesach, you're like, okay, well, in another hour, it's going to be forbidden to have chametz. I don't even want them back anymore because they're not going to do me any good. Vadai yei'ush, you clearly despaired of ever getting them back. And if yei'ush was really kona, well, then at the moment you were mityaesh, I should have acquired them. And then I shouldn't be able to just give you your croutons back because when I acquire them, I'm supposed to pay back their value from the time that I stole them. Then if Rabba is right, then I should have to pay you money. To which Rabba answers no. He says a very good distinction. When the guy stole my computer, I gave up on never getting it back, and the guy who stole my computer obviously wanted my computer. But but when I stole your croutons, and you said, I don't want them anymore, I wasn't really interested in purchasing them at that point either. On the 14th of Nisan, when Pesach is about to come in, I don't want those croutons either because, right, even though I'm a thief, I do keep halacha and I don't eat chametz on Pesach. So at that point, I'm not interested in acquiring them, and that's why I don't acquire them. So Rabba says this doesn't contradict what I said because I was talking about a case of yei'ush when the thief wants to acquire them. If there's no interest on the part of acquiring them, well, then there's no acquiring. And this, by the way, goes better with the approach that it's not ownerless. If it were ownerless and it were already in my possession, it wouldn't really matter what I wanted anymore because it would be mine. This supports the reading that it's more that I have the rights to be zoche, to acquire it, even though it really is still yours. So if you despair of ever getting it back, I have the rights, but I only if I act upon those rights and I'm interested in acquiring it. Here, I'm not interested. Okay. Second question against Rabba. This time it's not Rav Yosef who questions him, but Abaye comes. Abaye Rabba, and it's going to be interesting. Rabba doesn't answer, but Rava answers. Sometimes Rabba and Rava get confused, so maybe it was a confused here because they usually write Resh Bet Chupchik, with that little, but it's possible that Rava, because Abai was questioning, maybe Rava came in and answered for Rabba. We're going to now talk about sacrifices. The Torah says, if you bring a korban ola, okay, and this gives you the details, but it says im ola korbano. If your korban is an ola, it doesn't say im ola korban. If the korban is an ola, it says korbano, your korban. So the Braita here says korbano, or maybe it's a Mishna, I don't remember. Korbano v'lo hagazul. Okay, it has to be your korban and not a stolen korban. Actually, this is coming up. Let's see for a second. No, it's not a Mishna. Okay. Korbano v'lo hagazul. Hechidami. That means it has to be your own korban, but not a stolen one. You can't bring a stolen korban on the altar. Hechidami. What's the case? Yei'ush lamalika pshita. Now, if I stole, there's an assumption here that what are we talking about? That we're going to, in answering it, we're going to break this assumption. But there's two ways you could steal a korban. Either you steal an animal and you sanctify it. That's what they assume we're talking about here. That it was a stolen animal that I decided to bring as a korban. The other option is, by the way, I could steal your animal that was already designated for a korban. That's something else. But right now they're assuming it's option one, and that's why they're going to have the question. Then they're going to actually say, no, you misunderstood the whole case. But if I stole your animal and then I sanctified it, well, we've already learned many times that I can't sanctify something that's not my own. So if it was before yei'ush, you didn't despair of receiving back your animal, and I stole it from you, lamalika. I don't need a pasuk to say I can't bring this as a korban. Pshita, it's still yours, obviously. And if it's yours and I sanctify it, that means nothing. I can't just walk into your house and sanctify something in your house. It's meaningless. So you don't need a drasha for that. Elalav la'achar yei'ush. It must be after yei'ush. And then what do you see? Shma mina yei'ush lo kanet. And then it's telling you, you can't bring, if you had yei'ush on your animal and I sanctified it, which I could do technically, but now they're saying you can't bring it as on the altar. Why? Because it's not, I could technically do it, but it's not my own. Why is it not my own? Because yei'ush is in konet. And this is teaching you that halacha. And that goes against what you said, Rabba, which is yei'ush is konet. Because the reason I can't bring it is because it's not my own. And if yei'ush was konet, it would be my own. So Amarle Rava v'litamech, he says, wait, that doesn't make sense what you're saying, because let's compare it to another situation where they say it's yours and not stolen one. And here's a braita that says, Haditanya mishkavo v'lo agazul. This is the zav. You might remember that a zav, someone who has this particular discharge, they can't, anything they sit on, they can sit on things, but if they sit on it, it becomes an avatuma. So if somebody else comes and touches it, comes in contact with it, they will become tameh. But it says they're mishkavo, which means his own mishkav. Now, what happens is not just his own mishkav. Like if he sits in your house on something, that will become an avatum also. But what does it come to exclude? Lo agazul, not if they stole it. So if I stole, let's say, let's say a man who's a zav steals a cover of a couch, puts it on his own couch, and sits on it, it's not going to become an avatuma because it's stolen. Now, hechidami. Now we want to find a case comparable to buying an animal and sanctifying it, which, by the way, is changing it, right? Because you're making it sanctified, is going to be similar, according to what they're saying, is to stealing wool and doing something with it. What'd you do? You turned it into a cover. That, of course, will become your own because you changed it. You turned it into your own thing. Right? Again, Beit Shammai might say no, but Beit Hillel would obviously say yes. And therefore, that can't be what they're talking about here, because that wouldn't be stolen anymore, because that would be your own, and you should be able to, the zav would make that tameh. It would still be mishkavo. And that would be the comparable case to stealing an animal and turning it into a sacrifice. So what must it be then? It must be the zav stole a cover of his friends and brought it into his house and stuck it on his couch, as is. So what would be the comparable case to a korban? He stole his friend's sacrifice and wants to bring it. So his friend set aside an animal for a sacrifice, and this person came and stole the sacrifice. That's what we're talking about. Now, what does this now have to do with yei'ush? Well, either you could say it's possible there was yei'ush, it's possible, right? In other words, the whole thing before of how can you sanctify something that wasn't yours? Well, that's irrelevant here because you stole something that was already sanctified. So it could be that this is even if it was before yei'ush. But a better interpretation, there's different interpretation of what this is, that even if they were mityaesh, you can't take someone's korban, right? 1 second. Right. Sorry. If the owner, let's say I steal your animal that you sacrificed, okay? And you had yei'ush. You said, oh, I'm never going to see that again. I'm giving up ownership rights. Think about it. You didn't have ownership rights. You sanctified it. Once it's sanctified, it belongs to the temple. It doesn't belong to you anymore. So basically, yei'ush is irrelevant here. So that's his answer. He says, don't try to prove it from here. This doesn't have anything to do with yei'ush. So this doesn't actually contradict what I'm talking about. Okay. Now, so again, it was all a matter of understanding what's the case of korban. Did I steal an animal and sell it, which is what we thought? And then when I stole the animal, the yei'ush was relevant because it was still your animal. But if I stole it when it's already a korban, then yei'ush is irrelevant because it's not even yours anymore. So those were two questions against Rabba that we resolved. Now Abai comes against Rav Yosef and says, now you need a little background here. We're talking about tumah, impurity. Impurity on a vessel works. When does a vessel become susceptible to impurity? When it's usable. Okay. Now, when does it become usable? When you finish creating the vessel, right? You create a vessel, and let's say you're making a mug until you put the handle on. Nobody really drinks without the handle. Okay. But let's say you don't mind drinking without a handle on it, and you decide, until I finish it, I'm going to actually use it already as a mug. I'm desperate. I have nothing else to drink out of. I'm going to use it as is. So according to the Mishna and Kalim, if it's something personal for me, for my own use, it's my house, and I'm just a regular person, and I have to have a pottery wheel in my house, and I made myself a nice mug. Well, as soon as I decide it's ready for use, it already can be susceptible to impurity. Vishal abdan, but if I own, okay, here it's a tanner, we're talking about leather, okay? But let's say the mug, if I'm a potter, and this is what I do for a living, and I decide to use it before I put the handle on, it doesn't become susceptible to impurity because likely I might use it a little, and then, okay, hopefully I wouldn't do this nowadays. People don't do this, but then I go sell it later, once it's finished, but it's not a finished product because I plan to sell it. So you can't call this a finished product, even if I plan to use it for my own personal use as is. But shel ganav machshava metamatan, and shel gazlan ein machshava metamatan. Now, if I steal something, then if I steal something, then I choose when it's usable enough. Let's say I steal something while it's in its still raw form, but I can choose when I could say, oh, I'm going to use it as is. Shel gazlan ein machshava metamatan. Now, what's the difference between a ganav and a gazlan? A gazlan does it. I know who the gazlan is because they come in my face, right? A ganav does it secretly. I don't know who the ganav is. So a ganav, I'll never, right? When they stole my computer, I have no idea of knowing who stole my computer. But if it was a gazlan who took it from me right in front of me, I have hopes that I'm going to get it back. If I have hopes I'm going to get it back, then I don't have yei'ush. And that's why just by me thinking I want to use it, let's say it's me stealing it, if I decide I want to use it, it doesn't matter because it's not really mine. It still belongs to the original owner, and it's they who get to decide when it's going to become susceptible to impurity. Rabbi Shimon Omer chiluf hadvarim. He says the exact opposite. Shel gazlan machshava metamatan. The same basic logic, but the opposite, which is a gazlan because they're violent and they're much more scary. I think I'll never get it back. Whereas a ganav, I hope that maybe we'll be able to find the person who came into my house in the middle of the night and stole my stuff. So shel ganav ein machshava metamatan lefishin lo nityashu ba'alim. And now here you have it explicitly because the ba'alim didn't give up hopes of ever getting it back. That's what it's all about. So they might have a difference, ganav, gazlan, but it's clear as soon as the owner has hopes of giving it up, then it becomes the thieves, which means yei'ush is koneh. Shma mina yei'ush koneh, kana, which goes against what Rav Yosef said. Amar le, hachi b'mayaskinan, shekitzan. He says, no. We're talking about that you took a hide and you did a little act to it, okay? It's not a real, the Mepharshim call this a shinoi, not a complete shinoi. It's not like taking wood and turning it into a vessel, but you did a little bit of work to turn it into this, you did a little trimming on it. And then yei'ush with a little maaseh, that's, a small shinoi, the two of them together will be koneh, even according to Rav Yosef. Yei'ush by itself, no, but yei'ush with a little maaseh would be. To which Matkifla Rabba bar Rav Hanan. But wait, the Mishnah before this was talking about an itzbah. What's an itzbah? Itzbah ein tzrichat pitzua. This is a hide that you would just put straight on the table without trimming it at all. So there was no shinoi maaseh. Ditnan, how do we know? If you're not missing anything, meaning it's complete, then just by you thinking about it, it can be matami. But if it's not usable at all like this, in itzba is the one thing that really is missing an action, but you could use it as is. And then because it was just talking about it, it seems like this is continuing to talk about an itzba, which means that there is no shinoi, and it's just yei'ush. So how could you possibly say that? Ella amarava, hi milta kasha be Rabba and Rav Yosef assumed betartin shnim below iparka. Rabba questioned Rav Yosef about this for 22 years when Rabba was the Rosh Shiva. You might remember this famous story. Rabba is I forget now who is who. One is the Oker Harim and one is the Sinai. I think it's Rav Yosef is the Sinai. He's the one with all the knowledge. Rabba is the Oker Harim who knows how to analyze better. And really, Rav Yosef was supposed to be the Rosh Shiva, but he gave it up and gave it to Rabba. And then he became the Rosh Shiva only 22 years later after Rabba died. And here, it's a reference to those 22 years. The Rabba was always throwing this source at him as a question, and he never answered it. Rav Yosef Parka until he became the Rosh Shiva, and then he answered it. When Rabba was already dead, then he answers the question, and he says, Shinoi Hashem kashinoi maaseh. He says, here it became an itzba. I took a piece of leather, a hide, and I put it on the table and called it a tablecloth. So just by calling it a tablecloth, that's somewhat of a shinoi. And that's why this isn't a case of just yei'ush. It's yei'ush with some shinoi, and that's calling it by name. And shinoi maaseh my taima. And why is shinoi shem the same? Because shinoi maaseh, what's the reason? Hata mikara etzim hashtikelim. Because there it was wood, now it's called a vessel, right? Now it's a bowl or something. Shinoi Hashem nami mikar karu mashcha ba'achtabrizin, right? This also changed its name, and they just bring the Aramaic term for what it was called before and what it was called after. Okay, and that's how he resolves this question. We're going to stop here right now because they're going to question this, and it'll continue into tomorrow's talk. But right now, we basically dealt today very simple structure. We finished up the Beit Shammai, Beit Hillel argument there, the ping pong between them. We went back to this issue of the Rabbi Chanina and Rabbi Eli, who actually both agreed, though, about the kefel, which seemed to disagree with Rav, and we had to resolve how does Rav deal with that Braita with those two opinions. It's those two people who seem to disagree with him about at what price we assess the kefel, the earlier price or the now price, and we dealt with that with three possible explanations of the one line in the Gemara that Rabbi said. Then we brought Rabba, who said Shinoi is Kona, which everyone agrees with. And then Rabbi said that yei'ush is Kona. And that's what we had a big debate about. The Rav Yosef didn't think yei'ush is Kona. Rabbi himself wasn't sure if it was Rabbanit or Torah. And then Rav Yosef says it's just not true. And in the end, right after the two questions on Rabbi that we resolved, the last question on Rav Yosef, which we had to resolve by saying, well, he does think that yei'ush plays a factor if there's a change in name or a bit of a change in action. Okay, a small change with yei'ush would allow for a kinyan of the ganav. But this small change on its own, no, and yei'ush by itself, no. That's it for today. Wishing everybody a Shavua Tov.